What's going on, guys? Crash Out MMA back with another video. I told you guys in the last video that I was going to be uploading a banger soon, and here is that banger. This is a video I've been a little bit excited to make because I have been thinking a lot about this video. I keep looking at Henry Cejudo with the McDonald's hat on, dude. I can't. But there's been a lot of fighters on lost streaks recently. There's a lot of old guys in the rankings. So I was going to talk a little bit about UFC fighters that I think need to retire. I'm going to be talking about one guy from every division, one person that's just absolutely cooked or has nothing left for them in the division, and I think needs to move on to bigger and better things. Probably not bigger or better, but they just need to leave, to be honest. So, yeah, we'll jump right in. Okay, so starting with the flyweight division, I have selected Tim Elliott, as you can see. Now, here's the thing about Tim Elliott, dude. Like, you have to remember that his last fight was literally over a year ago against Sumadarji, and he did win that fight impressively with a submission, but this guy's been, like, perennially, like, number 12 ranked in the division. He's just sort of been a journeyman that's staying there, sort of like being a gatekeeper kind of, but he doesn't really fight that much. I think he got injured or something recently, like he had a fight booked. I might be misremembering that. But like realistically, this is an old guy. He said it himself. He probably doesn't have another run at the title. So, I don't understand what the point for him is of just sticking around taking, fights against up and coming unranked prospects that are like young dangerous guys, or just against shitty number 14, number 15 kind of contenders, because really that's all that's going to be left for him. And at his age, I really don't think he needs to be fighting for a paycheck. He's had a long UFC career in the flyweight division, but overall, like when you look at the flyweight division, there's a lot of young guys, and a lot of the people in the rankings just sort of are young or have momentum or are just trash and going to fall out of the rankings soon anyway. But of the ranked fighters, Tim Elliott's actually kind of good, but I just don't see a purpose in him sticking around at flyweight. His title aspirations obviously have been cooked for years, and realistically, like, there's not much left for him in the UFC. Sure, he could fight some up-and-coming guy, but it's flyweight. Like, if he beats an unranked dude, what's that really doing for him and his legacy altogether anyway? So, look, I love Tim Elliott. He's a crafty vet, but I gotta say, dude, you need to retire. He's almost 40 years old. Yeah. Tim Elliott, he's my pick for the flyweight division for a fighter who needs to retire. But moving on to the bantamweight division, this one's probably going to be a little bit of a hot take, but it's going to be Henry Cejudo. Look, dude, after watching him quit in the corner against Song Yadong after an eye poke, now listen, dude, we don't, I sound like Henry Cejudo right now, dude, but listen, we don't know as fans how bad that eye poke really was, but Henry took the full 5 minutes that he was allowed for the foul, fought the end of the round, and then went back to his corner and proceeded to say multiple times that he can't see. Now, maybe if this was a guy who has had his first fight in the UFC, I'd be like, oh, he didn't really mean for it to be broken up. He would have kept fighting. But Henry's a veteran. He's a championship level contender. He's been fighting for years. He knew that if he said something like that, he was going to get the fight called off, realistically. And I think Henry was just sort of looking for an easy way out. He didn't want to keep fighting, and I think he just wanted, he kind of quit a little bit. And honestly, I don't know why this guy unretired. Obviously, he retired super early as sort of a power move that didn't work at all. And since he's come back, he's lost 3 times in a row. Granted, he had close competitive fights with Aljamain Sterling and Merab, who are some of the greatest bantamweights of all time. But he's going in there against a guy in Song Yadong who got schooled pretty much by Petr Yan, if we're being honest, last year. And he didn't shoot a single takedown, or he didn't commit to a single takedown, if we're being honest. He shot those little half-assed takedowns, but let's be real here, they weren't going to do anything. He wasn't actually trying to get him down. And he just stood there, traded strikes with Song. Song landed better shots. And at first opportunity that he could, Henry quit due to a foul. Listen, man, he's getting old. There's not really anything left for him at the division. What's he going to do? Fight like some up and coming Amin Zahabi, like how Jose Aldo's fighting random bums. He's gonna fight Mario Bautista. It just doesn't make sense for him to stick around anymore. He's lost his last 3 fights since he's come back from retirement. Personally, I think Henry Cejudo doesn't want to be fighting anymore. He's got his podcast. He's got other things he's doing. He's obviously not really hungry anymore. I think, personally, Henry, you're cooked. Just put the fries in the bag, brother. You got your podcast with Marty Fake Newsman, so just get on there, retire from the sport. You have a great legacy, double champ, but I think it's probably over for your career. But moving on to the featherweight division, I have Calvin Kattar. I don't think this is super controversial. Calvin Kattar really hasn't been great for a while, losing to Arnold Allen, which Arnold Allen's elite. You can't really even blame him. And then losing that close fight to Josh Emmett. And he got injured as well, and so he was out for a while. Got dominated in the grappling by Aljamain Sterling. And Yusuf Zalal ran a marathon inside of the octagon and basically managed to run away the entire fight against Calvin Kattar. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but Calvin Kattar, really, he's a little bit older. He's out of his prime. He's not going to go up from here. So, really, I don't want to see him just slowly fall out of the rankings. He had a good run. He was a great sort of contender, gatekeeper type of guy in the division. Legendary fight against Max Holloway, obviously showing off his toughness in that fight, even though Max set record punches on his face. But, Calvin Kattar, good guy. But realistically, where's he going to go from here? He's lost his last 3 fights, or more than that, I believe, as well. Yusuf Zalal, he just showed that he can't beat a young up-and-comer in Yusuf Zalal. Before that, obviously, with Aljamain Sterling just completely dominating him in the grappling. I honestly think that Calvin Kattar probably could pick up maybe a couple wins against some unranked guys. But personally, I wouldn't even pick him to beat anybody in the rankings nowadays in the featherweight division. Since that injury and since all of his sort of decline, he really hasn't been the same. And personally, I think, for the good of his legacy, for the good of, his health, I don't think there's any reason for him to keep fighting unless it's just for a paycheck. So Calvin Kattar, you've had a great UFC run. I think it's time for you to retire as well. Moving on to the lightweight division. Benoit Saint-Denis. Okay, this one is kind of painful for me because I used to be a big BSD fan back whenever he was, coming up, beating the Bonfim brothers, back, when he had that horrendous fight where it should have been stopped against Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos, but the ref is fucking incompetent and didn't stop it. Terrible reffing, obviously. But, I became a fan of him early for his toughness and, his story. And then watching him go in there at UFC 295, head kick Matt Frivola. I was becoming a big fan of him. And going into that fight with Dustin Poirier, I was rooting for this guy. I didn't pick him, but I was like, he's very good. Tough chin, marauder, great grappling. But I think his last couple fights have shown us that being good in the military doesn't make you UFC caliber material. Because this guy, walked in there against Dustin Poirier, gassed out after 1 round of dominating him on the ground, and then went in there and just tried to blitz him with body kicks. He's got no head movement, got cracked, and then he also showed that his grappling is very overrated. He fought Renato Moicano and got 10-7'd, taken down and brutally beaten on the ground. And it really just comes down to, I mean, there's talk of him fighting Joel Alvarez. What do you guys think's going to happen in that fight? He's either going to get brutally chinned or he's going to get, hurt and submitted. Joel's too good for him. He's much bigger. So, Benoit, he's a little bit older than most people are when they get into the sport too, because Benoit got into the sport decently late, obviously, since he had his little French special ops career, which obviously salute to him. I respect veterans and all that, but he, I don't think, is cut out to continue fighting in the UFC, because sure, maybe he can pick up some wins against some more unranked bums and maybe some uprising prospects, but I don't think he's ever going to be in the rankings again. I would pick everyone who's currently in the rankings to beat him, as well as many people who are outside the rankings, guys like Joel Alvarez, because his fundamentals just aren't very good. He's got some things that he's very good at, like, his judo throws and stuff. He's got, you know, different grappling moves that are pretty interesting. His body kick is quite decent, but other than a couple of things, he's not very well rounded, and he's lacking those fundamentals. So even though he has some physicality and, he's got all the heart in the world, I just don't see really what's left for him. Like, I think it's better for his health if he just leaves the sport, retires. He's had a short career, but it was really cool being able to go in there at UFC 295, one of the biggest cards, fight a guy in Matt Frivola, fight in a huge card in Paris as a main event, fight in the Florida card for UFC, what was it, 302. So, he's had a great, after his military career, he's had a UFC career that some people can only dream of, but Benoit, he's fallen out of the rankings. I think if they make that Joel Alvarez fight, he's about to lose that as well and get chinned. So I just don't see what's left for him in the lightweight division. So personally, I think that he should retire. Moving on to the welterweight division. This one's going to get some people mad, I can already tell. Kamaru Usman. Here's the thing, dude. Here's the thing about Kamaru Usman, right? Don't get me wrong. I have him in my top 15 all time. I respect him a lot. He's very good. And I would pick him to beat a lot of the top guys at welterweight right now. Maybe not sort of that top 5, but outside of the top 5, I don't really think there's anybody that's going to do that well against him. Great wrestling, but we have seen that he's starting to wear, all that stuff about his knees being really bad and everything like that. He hasn't fought in well over a year, probably almost a year and a half now, since last October in 2023 is when he fought. So it's been a long time since he's fought. Obviously, he lost that very close fight to Khamzat Chimaev, and then before that, he got sort of a close decision fight, and then he lost that against Leon Edwards, and then before that, obviously, head kicked by Leon Edwards. So he's on sort of a skid. Now, here's the caveat with this. I think they're going to make the Joaquin Buckley fight for later this year. And if they do make the Joaquin Buckley fight, I think Joaquin will knock out Usman. And I think at that point, it's safe for Usman to retire. But even if he does win that fight, really there's not much left for him, because I don't think he's ever going to recapture the belt. I just don't think that's going to happen. And, he's a guy that, he strikes me as a guy that's not going to want to stick around just taking fights to fight. He's one of the best ever. So I really don't see him as a guy wanting to be that sort of gatekeeper, floating in that sort of outside the top 5, fighting, the number 10 guy or whatever, and winning one, losing one here. So I think the best thing he can do for his legacy is either retire now or retire, win or lose, after the Joaquin Buckley fight. If he beats Buckley, then great. He actually would probably move up a couple of spots on my all-time list, especially because the loss against Khamzat is kind of controversial. A lot of people, including myself, thought that fight should have been a draw. But really, at welterweight, and I'm talking about at welterweight, if he moves up to middleweight potentially, there could be a whole new career for him there. Hey, you could have a couple more fights before he retires. But like I said, he's getting old regardless, so he probably only has a couple more fights left in his body anyway. And same thing as Henry Cejudo. He has his podcast and everything. He's doing well outside of the UFC, so I really don't think that he needs to keep fighting. So, Kamaru Usman, you know what? I think you should retire, man. And then, moving on to the middleweight division, It's Israel Adesanya. Now listen, dude. Some people that I know, like in real life, that watch my Goatless video were mad that Adesanya isn't top 15. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I just gotta say, when your best couple of wins are Robert Whittaker's, the wins over Robert Whittaker, one of which was arguably a robbery, and then a bunch of boring decision fights against Yoel Romero and Jared Cannonier and guys like that look very unimpressive, you're not going to be on my top 15. But back to the focus of the video, Israel Adesanya, you need to retire. Listen, man, you're a top 25 all-time fighter in my opinion still, even after your losses, but realistically, and this is what it is for a lot of the people I've been talking about that need to retire, you need to protect your legacy. You know, if you keep fighting, there's really not much left for you to gain, okay? Because you lost to Poatan, and then granted, he came back, he beat Pereira in a very impressive win. Then he got dog-walked by Strickland, pun intended, immediately. And then right after that came back, fought Dreykus, got finished. And then he went to fight Imavov. I actually thought that he was going to beat Imavov, and he looked good early, and then he got caught, you know. Imavov's the younger guy, the hungrier guy, because obviously Adesanya's a little bit older. He's had all of that sort of time at the top, and Imavov's a hungrier guy, sort of upcoming contender. So, no shame in losing to him. Adesanya still has a great resume, one of the only people ever to defeat Pereira, and in the UFC, the only person to beat Pereira. So, I think that he has a lot going for him. But realistically, if he keeps fighting, there's really not much left for him in the division. Sure, maybe there's the Strickland rematch that opens up, but I really don't think he deserves that. Strickland's really only coming off of one loss, because his last two fights his Paulo Costa fight was a win, and the one before that against Dreykus should have been a win in my opinion, and he has one loss. Adesanya coming off of 3 losses out of his last 4 fights. I personally think that he needs to maybe... I can't even see him moving up and doing anything. I think personally Adesanya just needs to retire, because any loss from now on is going to really hurt his legacy. You know what I mean? And wins, he doesn't really have any wins that are going to do much for him. Like, again, other than Strickland, he's got, like, Caio Borralho. I think Caio wins that. I think he's better than Imavov. And now, all of a sudden, you've lost 4 fights in a row. You're sort of falling out of the top 5, top 6 sort of conversation. You're basically, fighting for paychecks at that point. So, I think, like I've been talking about, like with Usman, like I was talking about with other people, he needs to protect his legacy. Him and Usman are the 2 biggest ones on this list. So, it might be a little bit early in some people's eyes, but I think if they retire now, it's just going to not only be better for their legacy, but, they won't get as much head trauma. It'll be healthier for them. They already are set up. They're set for life. They got money they need. They don't need to fight for paychecks or anything. And I think both of their title aspirations are pretty much dead. So I would actually say that those 2, including Adesanya, do need to retire. Regardless, moving on to light heavyweight, I think we all knew it was coming. Anthony Lionheart Smith, it's over for you. You're cooked, bro. You just need to retire, man. You had a run. I'm not going to call it a good run, but you had a run. You had your little showing of heart against John Jones, but it's cooked for you. I love Reyes, okay? And it's bad. You're in a bad spot in your career. When I'm sad watching Reyes knock you out. Watching Reyes versus Smith genuinely just made me sad. It was like it was like child abuse, dude. He was Anthony Smith, looking blobby in there. Dude, Anthony Smith really doesn't have anything left. I think, obviously 0 title aspirations anymore. I don't think he has a chance at the title. I really don't think he has a chance to beat anybody above him in the rankings. And you're telling me you think Anthony Smith is going to be a guy going in there and fighting unranked contenders, in the apex? Like, he doesn't strike me as a guy who would want to do that and fight for a paycheck anyway. So personally, I think Anthony Smith needs to retire. His head's probably cooked. He's lost his last couple of fights. So, listen, man. I think it's time. I think it's time for him to retire. And as much as it is kind of sad because he is kind of fun, or used to be kind of fun to watch, it's like, how much longer are we going to see him being fed to guys that are up and coming? Like, the Vitor Petrino win was literally like grace from God. There was no reason he should have won that fight. Vitor obviously is trash looking in retrospect, but even now in a rematch, I think Vitor probably wins that if he doesn't do something stupid like dive at his legs and get caught in a guillotine and, quit. So Anthony Smith, I don't see a path forward for him. Because let's say he beats an up-and-coming contender, fights down, and then they give him another shot into the rankings against, like, Alonzo Menafield or something, and he gets slumped out cold. It's not doing anything for him. So I think the best thing he can do for himself, for his image to the fans, is retire now. And, I think it would just be better for him, better for the division. But Anthony Smith, love you, bro, but yeah, your time has been up. But now, it's time for the heavyweight division, the blobs, the final segment of this video. And who else was there to pick but Tai Tuivasa? Listen, dude, Tai Tuivasa, the Taco Bell eating blob, dude, he's lost his last 5 fights in a row. Listen, dude, there's nothing left for this guy. I thought he had been cut by the UFC, but they gave him the fight against Rosenstruik. Some judge scored that for Tai 30-27, which I found hilarious. But, yeah. Come on, Tai. Like, he's getting dog-walked by, NPC blobs. Marcin Tybura cooked this guy, even though Tai looked okay early. Rosenstruik obviously pieced him up. Volkov cooked him immediately and submitted him. So, it's what's he sticking around for, honestly, is what I gotta say. Because it's clearly just for a paycheck, He's not taking his career very seriously. Eating Taco Bell, training out of Planet Fitness. I mean, just look at the physique on him. You can tell he's not, putting his training as his top priority. So I think this one was pretty obvious. This is a guy who maybe if he locked in could do all right, but he's just not athletic at all. He's just not built to be an MMA fighter. I think the UFC should have already cut him like 2 fights ago, or at least after losing to Marcin Tybura in the way he did. But it appears they're keeping him around for one more fight, which I don't see him beating anyone in the heavyweight top 15. And I actually think a lot of prospects beat him. Dude, Austin Lane probably has a good performance against this guy. So, if we're being honest, dude, Tai Tuivasa, get your ass out of here. Like, I'm hearing rumors that he's going to fight Shamil Gaziev. And if they do that fight, I think we all know who's going to win that matchup. And then at that point, they're probably going to cut Tai. But, I think it would just be slightly less. He's already humiliated, but I think it would be less humiliating if he just took his career as it is now, left, went and did something else in Australia, rather than sticking around and losing a 6th fight in a row and getting cut forcefully. So, yeah, Tai Tuivasa is my pick for the heavyweight division. Let me know what you guys thought of my picks in the comments. I know some of them were probably controversial, like definitely the Usman one would have been controversial, but if you guys disagree, let me know. If you guys agree, any other thoughts, yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.